Hi, welcome back. I'm glad you're here. I am excited that you've been coming back. And if you're new, if you haven't been here yet, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Eileen Jones, and this is just some little devotionals that I'm hoping are making a difference for you and um, your relationships and how you feel about yourself and how you feel about others and your relationship with the Father. So I'm hoping that these are making a difference for you. And so if this is your first time here, go ahead and click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're from and where you found me. And I'd also like to hear where you are at with your voice. Have you lost your voice to the world, and have you felt like people don't want to hear what you have to say? This is part 2. If you missed part 1, you might want to go back and hear that too. They don't have to be in order, so you can watch this first and then go back and watch it. Today, we're going to talk about what happens when your voice has actually been stolen. What does it mean when you actually spiritually and emotionally just don't feel like somebody wants to hear what you have to say? So you've done all the things you can to be a good listener. You've done all the things you can to actually hear other people, to be a good friend, to prefer other people, all the things we talked about before, but you still don't feel like anyone wants to hear what you have to say. So we're going to talk first about bitter root expectations. You can find out about that in Hebrews 12:15. But what it says is when we have an expectation or a bitter root, meaning something has risen up inside us that makes us feel bitter and makes us expect something to happen. When we have an expectation that nobody wants to hear what we have to say, an expectation of not being heard, we actually fall short of God's grace. That's what that verse tells us. That's a pretty big deal. So if you have an expectation of how things are supposed to go, you have actually fallen short of God's grace, and it says that you defile many. So when you expect that nobody wants to hear what you have to say, the people around you get defiled because it kind of sets up an attitude of you're not going to hear me anyway. Have you ever heard that? Have you ever said that? Nobody wants to hear what I have to say. No one ever cares about what I have to say. You're not going to hear me anyway. Those are all bitter root expectations, and they're vows and curses that you either speak or that someone has spoken over you. And we'll talk about those again in a minute. So you need to make sure that you don't have a bitter root expectation and that you haven't said those words. Because if you had, you have to renounce them. Are you afraid to speak? Do you feel shy? Do you feel like you're kind of cowering back in a corner and you're too afraid to speak? Now that's a spirit of fear, and you need to deal with that because your words are important. You were created with a story to tell and a purpose to live. And if you are shy and cowering back in a corner, too afraid to say something, then that comes from somewhere, and that usually comes from a wound and a root that needs to be ripped out of there. The spirit of fear has come into that wounded place. Maybe you've been judged or condemned for something you've said in the past. And condemnation and judgment start from when we condemn or judge someone else. Matthew 7:1-3 talks about that. And so if you've ever judged or condemned someone else for what they've said, or judged how they said it, or they weren't a good enough speaker or something like that, that condemnation and judgment comes back on you and makes you feel the same condemnation and judgment you put on someone else. And you can break that in prayer. That can be broken in prayer. But also you need to recognize if you've done that so that it doesn't keep happening, because it'll keep happening. You can pray for it and break it, but if you keep judging, it's going to keep happening. The same is true for bitter root expectations, vows, and curses. If you keep saying that same thing, nobody wants to hear what I have to say, you can break that. But then if you keep saying it, it's just going to keep happening, right? Do you come across as sullen and grumpy? Are you not friendly outwardly? If you're doing that, people might be afraid to talk to you or listen to you. And so you might want to make sure you're smiling. That seems pretty obvious, but not everybody does that. If you smile, it totally changes how people look at you and totally changes whether they want to be near you or not, or hear what you have to say. So are you coming across as cowering, shy, grumpy, sullen? If so, change change your face. I say that to my children sometimes. I say, change your face. You aren't recognizing that you're not smiling. So really work on that. That is something easy to change, and you can practice that. Practice smiling. Here's another one that might be a little bit deeper and might be a little bit more painful, and this might require a good anointed to source session. But if you were expected to be seen and not heard, or if you felt silenced because people basically said that you had nothing important to say, if things were spoken over you like that, or there was a childhood trauma of children needing to be silent, that actually causes lifelong emotional trauma for children to be expected to be seen and not heard. That expectation of silence actually takes away our voice. And what happens when our voice is taken away, we sometimes start having health issues in our vocal cords, in our thyroid, all through this area. You might feel pain, you might get sore throats a lot because we stuff that memory of having something to say and not being allowed to say it. So you actually might have emotional childhood trauma of being expected to be silenced. If you are a parent who believed that children were to be seen and not heard, you might need to go to your children and apologize so that they don't have to deal with that wound their whole life. And if you were the child who was expected to be silenced, then you might need some help going through that. So go to eileencjones.com, and on there you're going to see Anointed to Source sessions, and I will help you spiritually break that. The same is true for bitterroot expectations, vows, curses, condemnation, and judgment. If you go through an Anointed to Source session, sometimes these things are so deep-seated in you that you actually need someone to help you through them. And I'm happy to do that. So this was part 2, why your voice has been stolen, because people don't want to hear what you have to say. We talked about bitterroot expectations, vows, judgment, condemnation, and shyness, cowering. We talked about a lot of stuff today. So if your voice has actually been stolen, go ahead over to my website, get on Anointed to Soar, and let's set up an appointment. And part 3 is coming, and part 3 is deeper than all these 3, than all these 2 that we just did. It's the deepest of the 3, and it is the reason why a lot of people feel like they don't have a voice and their communication with their family is lousy. And we're going to talk about that more in part 3. All right, thank you for being here. Go ahead and click subscribe, remember, so you can see the next one.